And at noon Eastern, but right now stay where you are. It's time for AM Joy with my friend Joy Reid. She's in D.C.
I am going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very, very interesting.
Good morning and welcome to AM Joy. Well, Donald Trump's major speech about all the things that have taken place with the Clintons never happened. But that moment that you just saw from June of 2016 has taken on new significance after the bombshell news this week that Trump's longtime fixer and former attorney, Michael Cohen, now claims that Trump knew about the infamous Trump Tower meeting with a Kremlin-linked Russian lawyer and lied about it. According to a knowledgeable source, Cohen is prepared to tell the special counsel that Trump knew in advance about the planned meeting between his son, Donald Trump Jr., son-in-law Jared Kushner, then campaign chairman Paul Manafort, and the Russian lawyer Natalia Veselnitskaya. Cohen says that Trump knew because Donald Jr. told him about it. The timeline here is important. Trump's tease of a very, very interesting speech about the Clintons happened on June 7th. Just a few hours after Trump Jr. agreed to a date for the meeting, a meeting in which Trump Jr. believed that he would receive incriminating information about Hillary Clinton, purportedly from a Russian government official. And the actual meeting took place on June 9th in Trump Tower. Trump continues to deny that he knew about the meeting ahead of time. It's a denial we've grown accustomed to hearing from Team Trump.
Did you tell your father anything about this?
No. It was such a nothing. There was nothing to tell. I mean, I wouldn't have even remembered it until you start scouring through the stuff.
Did you know at the time that they had the meeting?
No, I didn't know anything about the meeting.
The president said he became aware of it very recently, right before this came out, and that's when he was notified.
It must have been a very unimportant meeting, because I never even heard about it.
So as far as you know, as far as this incident is concerned, this is all of it.
This is everything. This is everything.
All right, so who do you believe? Joining me now to break all of this down, what we might call a mega panel, Nayyera, former State Department senior advisor, Paul Butler, professor of law at Georgetown Law School, Malcolm Nance, author of The Plot to Destroy Democracy, former FBI agent Clint Watts, author of Messing with the Enemy, David Cay Johnston, founder of DCReport.org, and former Watergate prosecutor Nick Ackerman. Wow, we just have an embarrassment of riches. So I'm just going to go around the horn and talk a little bit about this. I'm going to start with you on this, Paul, just on how this changes the legal case. I'm going to put that timeline back up one more time. Trump Tower meeting. June 3rd, Donald Trump Jr. gets this email from Rob Goldstone saying Moscow supports his father's candidacy. He responds, if it's what you say it is, I love it. Trump Jr. and Goldstone finalize the date for the meeting on June 7th. That same day, Trump teases this major speech. June 8th, Russian intelligence officers launch DC Leaks, a website used to release stolen emails that were hacked from the DNC and Hillary's campaign. June 9th, Trump Tower meeting happens. June 14th, DNC announces that its servers had been hacked. Now that we have at least one person willing to say that Donald Trump himself knew that that chain of events was related to the Russian infiltration, does this bring us closer to what we commonly call collusion or conspiracy?
Absolutely. So first, the caution, Michael Cohen is shady. He's trying to snitch. He's looking for a deal. And so anything he says has to be corroborated. Having said that, this is seismic. Now we have President Trump implicated in collusion, because if it's true, it corroborates a lot of other things that we already know. The Steele dossier said that the reason why Michael Cohen went to Prague was to strategize with the Russians about how to cover up Trump's involvement with them. And everything that we know about President Trump, would he allow his top aides to go to a meeting, his son-in-law, campaign chief, and not want to know anything about the meeting, especially if it's dirt on Hillary?
Yeah.
And so the corroboration doesn't have to be physical witnesses, although, again, what Cohen says is that other people knew that Trump knew. But it can also be circumstantial evidence, like, as you pointed out, the day after Trump hears this dirt's coming on Hillary, at this rally, he says, there's going to be a speech next week, and boy, oh boy, you know, we're going to have the dirt. And he doesn't actually deliver that speech because the dirt's not forthcoming.
Well, let's go to David Cay Johnston on whether or not Donald Trump Jr. would do that. You've been covering Donald Trump for a very, very long time. Would Donald Trump Jr. set up a meeting to get dirt on his father's opponent and not tell his father?
It is inconceivable that Donald Trump Jr. wouldn't tell his father. That's why we need to know what number those two blocked numbers were that he called. And let's not lose sight of something here, Joy. When a foreign government calls you and offers to interfere in an American election, there is only one thing any decent, ethical, patriotic American does. You pick up the phone, you call the FBI and say, I need to speak to someone in counterintelligence, period, full stop.
Yeah, and that clearly was not done, Nayyera. So let's go back, let's take one step back. Paul Butler said Cohen is shady, okay. And that is a take that I think is legitimate for people to have based on whatever we know about him so far. But what's interesting is that inside the Trump camp, they're not clear on whether Cohen is shady or not, depending on whose side he seems to be on. Here's Rudy Giuliani and his two takes on Michael Cohen.
No, I expect that he is going to cooperate with him. I don't think they'll be happy with it because he doesn't have any incriminating evidence about the president or himself. The man is an honest, honorable lawyer. I expected something like this from Cohen. He's been lying all week. I mean, he's been lying for years. There's nobody that I know that knows him that hasn't warned me that if his back is up against the wall, he'll lie like crazy because he's lied all his life.
So he's either super shady or he's super ethical, depending on whether it's May and he seems to be on Team Trump or whether he's not.
Well, I've watched many mafia movies, and I enjoy them. The Don is not supposed to let the consigliere go like this and turn on him to this degree. But that is right. That's a matter of loyalty. The loyalty with Donald Trump and his staff really only goes one way. At some point, they all move away from him and move on, and he's ultimately protecting himself. This is just part of a broader, we'd say that the lack of ethics, right? The immediacy of having an opportunity to win is so much more important than anything that could potentially be treasonous, anything that could be harmful to the American public. This overall sense that there's just lying and shadiness is starting to affect him in the polls. The independents who are fundamental to his election are pulling away from him. It's now down to less than 40% support among independents in Arizona, in Ohio, in Florida. These are places where he should be strong right now. And indictments or not, the American public is going to make a decision on how they feel about Donald Trump in November. This is fundamentally going to be an election that is responding to him, his personality, and I don't think it's going to go his way.
Well, it is interesting. I think it was a Quinnipiac poll that showed now that a majority of people think that the Russians have something on Donald Trump and that the independents are moving in that direction. But I want to stick just for a second to the legal piece of it because we're going to come back to the politics on it as well. But Nick Ackerman, could Don Jr., if in fact Cohen, who said, to Paul's point, that multiple people were in the room, so there is theoretically a way to easily corroborate whether he's being accurate about the idea that Donald Jr. shared with his father that we've got this meeting coming up where a Russian government official is going to give us dirt on Hillary Clinton. This is what Donald Jr. testified to the Senate Judiciary Committee. This was on September 7th, 2017. Let's listen. Oh, I'm going to read it. Sorry, I'm going to read his congressional testimony. I'm not going to play it. This is Don Jr. being asked about whether or not he would have told his father about this meeting. I wouldn't have wasted his time with it. I never spoke to my father about it. Now, Senator Patrick Leahy, Senator Dianne Feinstein want him to come back before the committee to answer questions in light of these new reports. Could this be criminal?
Yes. I mean, absolutely it's criminal. Lying to a congressional committee is a crime. But I think you have to also look at the crime that's already been charged against the Russians who've been indicted for breaking into the Democratic National Committee. The significance is that the scope of that conspiracy included not only the break-in, but also the staging of the stolen documents. And now, with this evidence, we have Donald Trump having knowledge of this conspiracy. If you recall, the initial email that went from Goldstone to Don Jr. talked about the fact that the Russian government was supporting Donald Trump's campaign and that they had this dirt on Hillary Clinton, which has come to mean, as the campaign well knew from Papadopoulos, the stolen emails. So now you've got Donald Trump, not only Don Jr., but Donald Trump with knowledge of this conspiracy upon which 12 Russians have already been indicted. So what we're looking at is another block in that evidence that shows that Donald Trump was part of this conspiracy.
And before, and I'm going to go back to the legal bit in a minute, but just for a moment, I want to go to Malcolm and then Clint. Let's go back and remind ourselves again of what happened. You had this attack by Russians on the DNC, and then you have this cascade of events all taking place in June, in which it does appear that the Trump campaign is trying to take advantage, at minimum, of that hacked material. Walk us back through. I think we do this. What have we done this every year for 2 years now? So do it again, Malcolm, Nance. Explain to us what it is that the Russians thought that they were getting and why it is that their conversation was about adoptions.
Well, you know, when we look at this in the broadest sense, this is only one of a series of activities that Russians were carrying out. There were many active measures being carried out, almost nearly simultaneously. But I like this one because this is the one where they went straight to the heart of the Trump organization and were going to give information directly to Donald Trump Jr. and possibly Donald Trump himself. And when they came in, it was supposed to be the Russian lawyer, Veselnitskaya, was acting as a representative of the Russian chief prosecutor general from Moscow, their version of the attorney general, who was going to give this dirt on Hillary Clinton. When they got to the meeting, she wanted to talk about adoptions, which was Russian speak for getting rid of the Magnitsky Act, which is the sanctions against the Russian oligarchy. That's what their principal thing was. I think that at some point it's going to come out that they did have a discussion about this and that they're all just putting us on by not knowing what they were there to talk about. And when that information comes out, I think that it's going to be even more damaging because there's no way the entire senior staff of Trump's team, Jared Kushner, Paul Manafort, you know, all of these people are in the room and would never report to Donald Trump. It's implausible.
And Clint Watts, the whole question about collusion has been, did people around Donald Trump decide that they were going to try to help his campaign by accepting information that they thought could be helpful and hurt Hillary Clinton? Or did Donald Trump, was he an active participant himself, right? Because that is, I guess, the $20 million question, is whether or not he was a knowing asset or whether he was an unwitting asset. Does this information, if it pans out with Cohen, take us closer to the idea that Donald Trump was a witting participant in what happened to Hillary Clinton and to our election system, the attack on it in 2016?
Yeah, it would take us closer, but I think we have to caution that unless there is some sort of physical evidence, so I think we've already talked about the phone call from that unknown number, or there is some other person that will corroborate what was said by Michael Cohen, this is going to be a very difficult angle to really flush itself out. The other trouble with this is it's now happening out in the public. We've not heard Cohen actually say this. We're hearing it from secondhand sources. So I think it's a little bit troublesome to push too far in terms of what the investigative revelations are that will come from it. What I think is more interesting is the number of tapes, the actual recordings of the president, the number of actual physical items, the technical indicators that are out there that connect to the president. I think if there's anything in terms of this investigation that will ultimately show collusion, it will have to be some hard evidence like that that will play out. And at the same point, when you look at how the Russians do their influence operations, they're looking for unwitting and witting agents to help advance their goals. Throughout all of this, what we've seen is some people around the Trump campaign maybe knew more of what they were involved in, whereas others potentially knew less, who just opened the door and seemed to be opportunistic, or who actually sought that out. And in many of these cases with people around the Trump campaign, you see some of both. And I don't think we'll know until the Mueller investigation really closes out and further indictments come forward who fits into which of those two camps.
Right, and before I move on from you, for those who don't know what the block number is, can you really quickly, Clint, remind people what that is?
Right, so in the sequence of events around Mr. Goldstone and his contacts with Donald Trump Jr., there was a series of phone calls that were made. One of the phone calls that was made during that time, after he had been contacted by Mr. Goldstone, was to a blocked number, an unknown number. No one knows who he was contacting, so in the context of this chain of events with this phone call, no one knows if that is the president or someone in the president's staff that also knew about what was going on, who was potentially coming into a meeting based on the Goldstone contact.
Absolutely. And just to really quickly, for those of you who have not, I'll remind you of this Paul Waldman piece in the Washington Post by Paul Waldman and Greg Sargent. This is from April 27th, and it's titled "The New House GOP Report." Remember, the Republican Senate, the House Intel Committee came out with a report. They said it's revealing, but not in a good way. According to the Democratic response to that Nunes memo, right after Donald Trump Jr. set up the specifics of the meeting in Trump Tower, he had 2 calls with a number in Russia belonging to Emin Agalarov. Between those 2 calls, the Democratic response recounts Trump Jr. received a 3rd call from a blocked number, and the question is, who might it have been? So let me very quickly go back to Nick. Does this now mean that there needs to be a second set of hearings that, at minimum, to answer the questions and to make Clint's very salient point, that it needs to be reopened, that maybe either House Intel or Senate Intel needs to recall Don Jr., maybe try to call Cohen?
I think if they call Don Jr., he's simply going to lie again. I don't expect that you're going to hear anything different from him. He's not going to suddenly admit that he lied to the committee. I would think that with respect to Cohen, they're probably not going to be able to speak to him because he's going to be cooperating with the Mueller investigation. Keep in mind that Cohen, in a lot of ways, is corroborated right on down the line on what happened here. It's not like this is some incident that was taken out of nowhere that suddenly we think Donald Trump knew about this meeting. I mean, I think it was pretty obvious to everybody that he had to know. He's the one that had the block number, for starters. He was also involved, again, going back to this most recent indictment. He asked the Russians in public to actually hack into Hillary Clinton's email in her server, and hours later, that's exactly what they did. He was also...
Joy, I'll tell you where those blocked phone records are now. A few miles from here in Robert Mueller's office.
Yeah.
He almost certainly has subpoenaed. So he already knows whether President Trump was called by Don Jr. And we all know if he was called, what the subject of the conversation was.
My panel's all sticking around. We're going to have you guys come back. But here's the other fun part. Michael Cohen likes to tape things that happen around him. So there seems to presumably to be a way to affirmatively find out if what he's saying is true. He says there were multiple people in the room. He does tend to tape a person, including Donald Trump. So it'll be interesting to know how this plays out. We're going to continue this on the other side of the break. We'll be right back.